Thanks, Shannon, for having us, and welcome to our little conflab on Agile contracts. I think as an attendee, you're going to see 5 or 6 perspectives on Agile contracts in a very short period. I'm attending in part to see what other people have to say about Agile contracts, because I think when you compare it to the not Agile contracts, we all are in a bit of a bind and a bit of a dilemma. I think we understand now that the digital transformation affects everybody. I was visiting a shipbuilder a few weeks ago, and I thought they were going to talk about their prowess in Agile IT, and it was all about working on the ship using augmented reality, et cetera, to be able to help people weld the ship. So the disruption is universal. Every business is a software business now, and the good news is we have some paths now. I think the Lean-Agile enterprise, the ability to combine the prowess of Agile teams and lean thinking at the higher levels of program and portfolio gives us a set of solutions that we can work with. Now, as I was preparing for this talk, I was actually working primarily in kind of the government context, but just recently, last week, as a matter of fact, I had a full week roadshow to India. And it really flavored my presentation here because this is a big challenge in that market. We talked to captive shops and outsourcing shops, all who had the same problem, which is that we can certainly be Agile. We're not crazy here. We'd like to be as Agile as we can be. We understand the power of Agile at the team level, at the program level, and even at the portfolio level, but we don't always have permission. And when we do have permission, we're still not sure exactly what that means. Are there specs? No specs? Do you want an estimate? No estimate? Time and materials? How are you working? How are we working? What are we handing off? Specs, features, stories? I saw contracting by story point, which is pretty scary. I think you can imagine the ramifications of that. How do you get feedback? Certainly contested awards, meaning that when we bid a project, especially in the US federal government space, high probability somebody else is going to say, I don't think that award was awarded right. So now how do you think about a contested award when you don't know what the price of the contract is? So these are serious issues, and frankly, they affect our ability to proceed in an Agile way. And we're moving from an environment where we thought we knew how to contract, which was these are our legacy contract models reflecting the iron triangle, where, hey, if you could tell me what the requirements are, I could predict the cost and give you a schedule. But those are just estimates, right? Well, it's not necessarily suitable that that be an estimate because I'm on the procurement side and I need to know, is this $3 million or $4 million? Is it $30 million or at $50 million? So we've been operating in this environment, somewhat successfully for, at least 30 or 40 years. But the reality is it doesn't free us from the constraints because maybe those aren't the right requirements. And if they're not the right requirements, then what do I do with the cost and schedule? So the iron triangle is not a good place to operate from. And in reality, the full range of Agile contracts types doesn't really help either. On the left, firm fixed price. On all the way over to the right is the pure time and materials. Neither of those are particularly rewarding. Neither of them, if you look about firm fixed price, that actually sets the supplier and the customer at odds. Immediately, their economic goals are different. From a supplier standpoint, it's a fixed price. I need to provide as little as possible to still get paid. And from a contractor standpoint, I need to get as much as possible for the minimum amount of money. And I don't think it's a good thing when we generally enter contracts with different economic principles. Way on the right, time and materials. Well, in a way, that's certainly more Agile. And we do see a lot of that. I certainly wouldn't rule that one out. But when are you done? How do you know? How do you measure value? What prevents the supplier from just saying, well, the longer this program goes, the better, or maybe in a government agency where they're saying funding the project is the goal rather than really delivering value. So I don't think either end of I don't think the iron triangle or even the spectrum really solves our problem. So we need a new approach. And we need an approach that optimizes the economic value for both parties, short and long term. We need adaptive responses to requirements. We can't just sit behind a spec and say, this is what you ordered, this is what you're getting, when it isn't the right thing. It belies Agile from the get-go. We can and should provide continuous visibility, objective evidence, and I think this is where we really have a breakthrough. Our Agile iterative and incremental model gave us a new tool called This is the System, and it's working or it isn't, versus this is where we are and the requirements burned down, or this is where we are approaching system integration. And we need to provide a measured approach, because what we've discovered at the portfolio level particularly is that investing in a large initiative, an epic, is an investment that pays off initially very low, even with incremental development. I don't have enough value to be able to really hit the the earned value chart. After that, it gets really, really good, but then after that, it's diminishing returns. So we may well discover that investing less than we thought gets the right economic value. How do I do that without a contract that supports that? And we also need to offer the supplier some confidence, because if it's a pure T&M thing and it can be cut off any minute, who could really assign their people to that? I mean, they have opportunity costs. They have lost opportunity associated with the other bids they didn't do. And frankly, a model that motivates all parties to build the best possible solution within the economic boundaries. And I'm going to highlight very briefly, kind of a lightning talk, one approach that we're seeing in use in a couple places, just as a suggested approach. And it's different than I think you've probably seen before, and I won't be able to cover it in much detail. On the other hand, I will cover it at a high level, and we'll make the slides available so that you can find your way to this content at whatever point suits your interest. I call this a Scaled Agile Managed Investment Contract because I couldn't think of anything clever. And why is it scaled? Because that's where the materiality is. It's when you're bringing 50 or 100 or 500 people to bear on a new initiative for a customer, the project gets really interesting, because that's when the overruns are not 10 or 20,000, or where the bids are not 10 or 20,000, they're 10 or 20 or 30 million. And in some cases, 10 times that amount, certainly in certain environments. So let's take a look at what this could be structured at. The first thing is an interesting challenge and opportunity, which is we know how we do our work now. We work in the context of agile teams. It's and team sprint. And for most of us, we know what that sprint length is. And even if we didn't necessarily all have the same sprint length, certainly in the context of a potential contract, we could establish that. We know the team is probably less than 10 individuals. We know that they're cross-functional self-organizing, and they can define, build, and test value. And we have a notion now that says, well, wait a minute, we could just hire one team or two teams for a sprint. And because they're going to deliver value every 2 weeks, and that's going to be objective evidence, this is the root of a potential new approach to agile contracts. And then how would we price it? Look, it's going to be X dollars per feature team sprint. Can't explain that in any depth, but I think you get the idea. This team or this set of teams can build features, and they do that every sprint. And we could talk about organizing that way. And then as we approach the contract boundaries, we have some rules and responsibilities that we need to discuss. We need to understand, I'll call this PI1, program increment. That's a safe term. It's a big set of sprints. It's 2, 3, 4, 5 sprints, whatever makes sense for you. How we're going to ramp up and ramp down when the time comes. What our responsibilities are. How many are we going to need for the initial PI? And then is it going to ramp up or down from there based upon the scope of our discovery? We have to understand the vision and roadmap. I probably don't have specs, but I certainly have to have an understanding of what we're trying to build. And a view that says we'll plan one sprint and that's good enough isn't good enough. We have to know more than that. And we have to have the ability to then commit to PI1 with some small number of folks. And the responsibilities are definitely different. There are no models of agile development, successful agile development, that decouple the customer from the supplier or the people that build it. So the customer has to be available and committed to be a participant in the program. This is really their program, not ours. On the right, we certainly know what we need to commit to. And in the center is the largest set of shared responsibilities. And they include vision and roadmap and what we describe as fixed and variable solution intent and other elements of the economic framework. If we could agree that we want to employ teams, not individuals, at a specific billing rate, and if we could agree on these responsibilities, we could talk about, let's just take this one PI at a time, or whatever increment you define. Rarely is that simply a sprint, although I've seen the cases in the federal government where a sprint really was the quantum. And we could start by making a commitment to the first program increment. We can provision the teams and the roles. We can do planning. That's a joint planning effort. That's face-to-face. That's all of us working together to describe exactly what we're trying to do. We can execute that first PI, and then we've done really We've established our program scope and timeline. We've done a big spike through the system. Maybe we have some working software. Maybe we have a demo. Maybe we just have some estimating work that we've done and an architecture that we put a thread through. We can update the vision and backlog, and now we're kind of good to go. We're ready to proceed because we've made it through this feasibility and scope area. So now the supplier has proven themselves to the customer. And by the way, in many cases, this might have to happen more than one time. If you're working in the DoD, you may have a couple of suppliers that you initiate this first PI with to establish the feasibility and scope and establish the visibility and the trust that would say, I think these folks get it. I think they can do what we need to do. And then we take it literally a PI at a time. We execute each PI. We measure the progress bi-weekly via the system demo. That's not optional. We're going to demo our work every 2 weeks. And that's not simply team demos. That's a team of teams working together to integrate that work. The system demo then is a major contract event, and that happens every 2 weeks. We can measure, evaluate, inspect, and adapt. And the solution demo is a really big deal. At that point, we all come together for the next PI and we evaluate the solution. And we decide then whether we want to increase, add teams. So you can see here we've added add an extra team or two. Take steady as she goes. Maybe pivot to a whole new, maybe keep the teams in place and pivot to a whole new direction, or potentially ramp down. And that gives us the option to treat things differently. As we start thinking about winding down and maintenance, we also start thinking about where our diminishing economic returns are. And as intelligent stakeholders, be we supplier or contractor, we're all obligated to make sure that the money is wisely spent. And the money is wisely spent based upon objective evidence of feedback. So we don't even want to necessarily commit to the entire scope of a program. We know that that is fraught with peril because that scope is going to change. Instead, we want to know what our wind down agreements are. And as we wind down, these solutions don't go away. We all know that. I mean, my guess is everybody on this conference, certainly the speakers, is involved in supporting systems that were developed 5 and 10 and even 15 years ago. We want to use the same execution model because we want to maybe add new functionality or go straight into maintenance or business as usual with the same teams. So rather than starting, small projects, we're going to think about doing this a value stream as possible. Doing a value stream at a time. And where possible, then, we can keep the knowledge acquisition and the value flow together. And if you want to know a little bit more about this process, take a look at scaledagileparamework.com Lean Budgets, which, along with an article called Agile Contracts, which is available at Advanced Topics, describes this in a little further detail. So I've reached the end of my 15-minute time box, and I'll tell you, 15 minutes goes by really fast. But given that, we're going to hold questions, and we're going to switch to the next speaker, and we're going to get another view of Agile contracts.